You see the signs throughout a lot of Metro Vancouver, a lot of downtown Vancouver, I should say, the neon signs, particularly on Hastings Street and places like that, that have sort of made a comeback in recent years, but there was a time when people hated them. So that's the subject of a new exhibit at the Museum of Vancouver, and Amanda McQuaig is here from the MOV to tell us more about it. Yeah. Thanks for coming in this morning.
Thank you for having me.
So we call you now the I don't know.
You can say the MOV.
The MOV.
Some people just say the MOV.
The MOV, okay.
Or the Museum of Vancouver.
Okay.
So it used to be Vancouver Museum, but now it's the Museum of Vancouver.
It's good. It's good. Good rebranding. All right. So the MOV. So it's the new exhibit at the MOV. It's called Neon Vancouver, Ugly Vancouver. Mm-hmm. So what's the history of neon signs in Vancouver? Because we hated them at some point, I know.
Right. So sort of in the post-war boom, late 40s, neon signs started coming into Vancouver, and there was sort of a move in the business sector to get more people to purchase neon signs as a way of advertising their businesses. Mm-hmm. So throughout the 50s and 60s, you started seeing just signs everywhere, and there were no limitations on size, how far they projected from buildings, mm-hmm. and you, to a certain extent, can get a feeling of that when you're on Hastings Street now. So right. The Save on Meats one is a classic. It's huge when you look at it. I mean, the pig itself is probably 3-4 feet tall, right? Yeah. So there's these massive signs, and they were everywhere. It wasn't just big businesses. It was mm-hmm. every mom and pop shop. Mm-hmm. And they started expanding out into the suburbs as well.
Right.
And so
there was, for instance, Helen's in Burnaby,
in
right?
Burnaby, yeah, which they've recently changed so that it's the Heights. So it's
right.
a heritage sign now.
Yeah.
But it became a sort of contention in terms of how these signs were sort of marring the natural beauty of Vancouver. Mm-hmm. And so people were saying, we've got this sort of tawdry display of advertisement. Doesn't matter where we go, we're being advertised at. We don't want all of this extra garbage. We want to just appreciate the natural beauty of Vancouver. And there's hilarious editorials that came out. And one is, we're being led by the nose through a hideous jungle of signs, was this one quote from an article that ran in the Vancouver Sun around that time.
And that was around when? The 60s and 70s?
That would have been about 76.
Okay.
Or no, earlier than that, the early 70s.
Okay.
And so
was there a movement then, or did that movement, was it successful in bringing down those signs?
So what happened is, in 1974, the city of Vancouver finally passed a bylaw that limited the signs to a certain extent. So they created a little booklet that would make it easy for shop owners to understand what the limitations of the signs were. And this is something that people can see in the exhibit. Mm-hmm. And it had sort of examples of what they thought was good design. Mm-hmm. And it outlined things like they can only protrude so far from the building. They can only take up a certain percentage of the facade of the building. So if it's flush to the building, it can only take up 60% of the front. Right. And so that's when you started seeing them come down.
Right.
And because a lot of the signs were leased, they were actually leased, which was unusual for cities. In a lot of cities, the signs were bought outright by stores.
Right, right.
In Vancouver, Neon Products, which was the primary sign creator, leased them to people so they could keep them in repair. Okay. So when they started coming down, they just ended up in this Neon Products junkyard, which is part of how the Museum of Vancouver was able to collect so many of them.
So was there an actual junkyard where they all went to die?
Just, like a neon sign graveyard.
So we're showing you some photos of some of the signs, which of course you'll recognize if you've spent any time in Vancouver or on Hastings Street. The Smiling Buddha Cabaret was famous not just for being the Smiling Buddha Cabaret, but also being, there's the Drake, but also the Smiling Buddha Cabaret being the name of a 5440 album as well.
Right, so that's how we actually got that sign. So when the Smiling Buddha Cabaret was shut down, they 5440 took the sign on tour with them as their backdrop. And lugged this giant thing around and brought it back in.
It's a great sign. Some of these signs are so just so kitschy and wonderful. I love them.
Oh, yeah.
So, and then there was one more photo I just wanted to mention. I think he's, what do you call him, this guy?
He
makes these signs?
a tube bender. or a neon artisan. So his name is Rob Gillette. He's located out in Langley. He's one of the last sort of neon artisans, independent neon artisans left in the area. And this is him using heat to actually bend the metal tubes. So they have the drawing on paper, and they bend it to match the drawing.
Right.
And then they heat the electrodes and fill the tube with the gas that makes them light up in the different colors.
So there is there a resurgence of neon signs in Vancouver?
No. It's almost completely dying out. It's
Really?
a dying art form.
That's too bad. So we just, right now, all we're doing is honoring the heritage signs?
To a certain extent, yeah. Well, and honoring the fact that some people do, now that there's not so many, you can really appreciate what a really interesting art form it is.
Yeah.
And some of those photos that you saw, you could really see how many signs there were on the street.
Right. Actually, there's a new one. The Diamond in Gastown just put up a neon sign.
They did.
That's
They're
right.
owned by the same people who own Save on Meat.
Exactly. So, yeah, bringing a little neon back into our lives.
Yeah.
With some regulation.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. What an interesting exhibit this will be. Neon Vancouver, Ugly Vancouver opens October 13th. So for tickets or information, you can go to 604-730-5304 or go to the Mauve's website, museumofvancouver.ca.